The whole damn sky tore open. No warning, no countdown, just a sudden shriek in the air, followed by impact. The first explosion vaporized the northern pipeline junction. The second struck a cluster of fuel tanks so violently, flames shot hundreds of feet into the air. Within 30 seconds, 12 more explosions followed, each one more precise than the last. It wasn't chaos, it was a sequence, a choreography, like someone had planned every fireball to the second. And they had, because this wasn't random. This wasn't a drone strike gone off course. This was Package Delta. A coordinated multi-phase U.S. strike that hit Ras Issa like a hammer, flattening fuel depots, logistics centers, underground tunnels, and a suspected command node buried beneath a storage facility. By the time the last ordnance hit, the once bustling terminal looked like a cratered wasteland. And the Houthis? Scrambling, silent, stunned. Because for years Ras Issa had been off limits, untouched. Even during the heaviest years of Saudi-led airstrikes, the port had been spared, seen as infrastructure, not a military target. But not anymore. The U.S. didn't just cross that line, it erased it. And the question isn't why they did it, the real question is, what message were they sending? Because the last time a nation struck an oil terminal this critical, it rewrote the rules of engagement in the entire region. And this wasn't just an airstrike. It was a warning delivered in fire. Ras Issa wasn't just a port. It was a bank account, a fueling station, a war chest wrapped in pipes and steel. For the Houthi movement, this oil terminal on the Red Sea coast was more than infrastructure. It was survival. Millions of barrels of crude had flowed through it, some refined locally, others trucked inland to power armored convoys or sold on the black market to fund drone and missile programs. For years, the U.S. and its allies had watched from orbit, noting the fuel transfers, the strange traffic patterns, and the surge in nighttime activity. But still, no strikes. Why? Because targeting an oil facility, especially one near civilian zones, is a geopolitical powder keg. It risks global outrage, oil market disruption, and endless accusations of war crimes. Which is exactly why the Houthis thought it was untouchable. Until now. What changed? One word. Escalation. In the weeks leading up to April 17th, Houthi forces had ramped up attacks in the Red Sea. Commercial tankers were harassed. U.S. Navy destroyers were radar-locked. Reaper drones were shot down without warning. A missile nearly struck a U.S. F-16. The intent was clear. They weren't just resisting, they were daring the U.S. to respond. And when the dare came, so did the data. U.S. ISR platforms, Triton drones, satellite sweeps, and SIGINT intercepts had quietly mapped out Ras Issa's role in the Houthi war effort, not just as a fuel hub, but as a relay point. Communications passed through it. Officers met there. Mobile command vans parked nearby for hours at a time. It wasn't a refinery anymore. It was a node. And when intelligence confirmed that a planned weapons shipment was being staged in Ras Issa for regional transport, that was the green light. A target like that doesn't just get flagged, it gets assigned a strike package. And in this case, the planners didn't hold back. The order came through at 0103 local time. 3 words. Package Delta. Execute. For most people, those words mean nothing. But for the men and women aboard the USS Truman and the destroyer circling off Yemen's coast, it was the start of something mechanical, calculated, unstoppable. Package Delta isn't a warning shot. It's not a slap on the wrist. It's the playbook for what happens when the United States decides a facility is no longer an asset, it's a threat. And threats get erased. Within minutes, the sea was alive with activity. On the Truman's flight deck, yellow shirts waved 4 FA-18 Super Hornets into a final launch position. Their payload? GBU-38 JDAMs, precision-guided bombs designed to penetrate reinforced structures, and AGM-88 HARM missiles, built to home in on enemy radar. Each Hornet was loaded for a surgical strike, not a show. While catapults hissed and steam clouds drifted into the night, 2 EA-18G Growlers electronic warfare aircraft were already in the air. Their mission? Blind Houthi sensors, jam radar signals, and flood the spectrum with enough digital noise to make the defenders think a ghost fleet was coming. This wasn't just air power, it was a deception at Mach 1. Overhead, a Navy MQ-4C Triton drone maintained ISR coverage at 55,000 feet. Its camera pods tracked thermal signatures, movement inside the port, and the faint electromagnetic pulses from underground communications nodes. It painted a perfect picture for the fire control teams below. At 01:17 hours, the strike began. The Growlers entered first, high and fast, broadcasting across wide frequency bands, crippling early warning systems and masking the real attack vector. Seconds later, the Hornets screamed in over the Red Sea at low altitude, hugging the deck at 500 knots. Their targets were locked hours earlier. Nothing left to guess. Target Alpha, a fuel tank cluster north of the pipeline yard. Confirmed storage site for mobile generators and possibly rocket propellant. The first JDAMs hit Target Alpha like thunder from a clear sky. A wall of fire erupted as fuel tanks ruptured, igniting a chain reaction that engulfed the northern yard. The heat signature lit up the Triton centers like a flare in pitch black. Secondary explosions confirmed this wasn't just fuel, it was ammunition or worse. But the U.S. wasn't done. At sea, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer opened its VLS cells, that's vertical launch system. 2 Tomahawk cruise missiles arced into the sky, hugging the Earth on a programmed path toward Rasisa's southern perimeter. Suspected underground tunnel entrance used to smuggle weapons inland. Relay antenna feeding encrypted signals across the coastline. Both were reduced to debris. From first strike to final impact, the operation took all of 6 minutes. That's not combat, that's choreography. And the result? 17 confirmed strikes. 0 collateral hits outside the designated kill box. All primary targets neutralized. No civilian casualties reported within the blast radius. But the damage wasn't just physical. Houthi radio traffic, what little was left, descended into chaos. Transmissions dropped mid-sentence. GPS signals went dark. Radar sites shut down or shifted into passive mode, afraid to emit and become the next one on the list. Command structures didn't just lose fuel, they lost communication, coordination, and worst of all, face. Because for years, Rasisa had been their untouchable gem. They flaunted it, protected it, used it as leverage. And now, it was just smoke. High above it all, the MQ-4C Triton kept circling, watching, listening, waiting for anything else to move. Nothing did. But the smoke hadn't even cleared when panic set in. Within an hour of the last explosion, Houthi command channels lit up, then went eerily silent. Encrypted chatter spiked, then flatlined. Emergency comms failed. Local relays went offline. Thermal imaging showed dozens of figures abandoning Rasisa on foot, scattering inland without vehicles, without gear, just running. They weren't evacuating, they were fleeing. And for a group that prides itself on resilience, that silence said everything. But in public, that's a different story. Less than 3 hours after the attack, Houthi-run Telegram channels posted a grainy video of what they claimed was a downed U.S. drone. The caption read, "We repelled the American aggression." No timestamp, no location, just shaky footage of flames and wreckage recycled from a previous incident. Classic misdirection. They wanted their followers to believe that this was a win, that they fought back, that American power could be resisted. But satellite imagery painted a very different picture. Entire sections of Ras Issa were scorched black. Storage tanks melted like candles. Antenna towers collapsed inward, severed at the base. Drones spotted armed pickup trucks abandoned with doors open, the engines still warm. And the real giveaway? Not a single retaliation attempt. No launch, no radar spike, no response. They were too disoriented, too offline, too shocked. It wasn't just the port that burned, it was their ability to process what had just happened. Internationally, the story was already spreading. News outlets cited a massive U.S. airstrike on a strategic Houthi fuel terminal. Defense analysts debated whether this marked a shift in American policy, from military-only strikes to targeting economic nodes. Some called it justified, others warned it would escalate the conflict. But inside Houthi territory, confusion ruled. Internal sources intercepted by U.S. SIGINT revealed frantic orders being shouted between field commanders. Find a working transmitter. What happened to HQ Ras Issa? Are we under cyber attack? They weren't wrong to ask. Because what they just experienced wasn't a traditional bombing run. It was precision disruption. Multi-domain, synchronized, designed not just to destroy but to disorient. That's what made this different. This wasn't about territory, it was about tempo, about control. And in a single coordinated strike, the U.S. had taken the initiative, flipped the momentum, and forced the Houthis to play defense for the first time in weeks. And now the question wasn't when the next strike would come, but how much was still left to hit. For the Houthis, Ras Issa was supposed to be off the board. Even during the peak of the Saudi-led campaign, the oil terminal had remained untouched, a kind of unofficial red zone that no one dared cross. It wasn't just about fuel, it was about optics. Hitting Ras Issa meant hitting infrastructure. It meant headlines. It meant backlash. But on April 17th, the U.S. crossed that line, and it didn't blink. And that changed everything. This wasn't a symbolic strike. This was a doctrine shift. For months, U.S. policy in the region had centered on containment, deterrence, preventing escalation. Navy destroyers shadowed commercial shipping lanes. Carrier groups played defense. And every Houthi provocation, missile launches, drone swarms, radar locks, was met with precision but restraint. That changed the moment Ras Issa became a military node. From the U.S. perspective, this wasn't just about fuel anymore. It was about leverage. Because the Houthis weren't just attacking ships, they were betting on restraint. They'd seen America hold fire in the face of provocation before. They assumed the playbook hadn't changed. But it had. And Ras Issa proved it. You don't vaporize a fuel depot unless you're sending a message. And that message went far beyond Yemen. Tehran heard it. So did Damascus and Moscow. Because this wasn't just punishment, it was preemption. A reminder that if you're using civilian infrastructure to wage war, it's not protected. If you park a mobile command unit under an oil tank, that oil tank becomes a target. If your fuel depot feeds the drones attacking global shipping lanes, then that depot is fair game. And that's what made this a game changer. It wasn't about the number of bombs dropped. It was about the mindset behind them. The U.S. didn't ask for permission, didn't issue a public warning, didn't wait for an attack to land. It used ISR data, confirmed intelligence, and a shifting rulebook to strike preemptively, surgically, and with zero tolerance for gray areas. From a strategic standpoint, it was a clean move. But geopolitically, it was an earthquake. Within 24 hours, oil markets wobbled. Coalition partners called emergency sessions. Diplomatic back channels lit up between Gulf states and Washington. The strike on Ras Issa showed that the U.S. was no longer interested in playing defense on someone else's terms. The message was clear. If it supports your war machine, it's a target. That's a seismic shift in posture. And it has ripple effects far beyond the Houthis. Because now, any militia, proxy group, or state actor that hides its operations behind the veil of civilian infrastructure just got a wake-up call. There's no more safety in the assumption that certain sites are too valuable, too political, or too complicated to hit. This wasn't just a message to the Houthis. It was a message to everyone watching. If you use infrastructure to launch attacks, don't expect that infrastructure to survive. The fire at Ras Issa burned for hours. By sunrise, the smoke column was visible from space. Infrared satellites showed the residual heat signature still pulsing like a wound across Yemen's coast. But by then, the U.S. strike group had already repositioned. Air assets were refueled, targets reassessed, the next phase already drafted. This wasn't improvisation, this was blueprint warfare. Every phase of the strike, from jamming to launch to battle damage assessment, followed a script designed not just to destroy